You found unravel. That means you were chosen. They didn't try to silence you because you were wrong. They tried to silence you because you were right, loudly, unmistakably, irreversibly right. Because truth isn't just dangerous to a lie, it's deadly. Since the beginning, you felt the tension in rooms that should have been safe. You noticed how conversations would shift when you spoke, how some people looked at you like your presence alone was a disruption. You weren't loud. You weren't arrogant. You just carried something they didn't understand and couldn't control. You were never meant to blend in. You weren't meant to follow the script. You weren't designed to bow your head and keep quiet when something in your soul screamed that something was off. And for that, they feared you. They sensed it in childhood, even if they couldn't articulate it. Teachers may have labeled you a distraction. Peers may have mocked your deep thoughts or intuition. Family may have pressured you to conform to an identity that suffocated you. But none of it ever fit, because something deeper, something older, was writing your story. And still, despite the resistance, despite the attempts to mute your voice, your energy remained. You didn't disappear. You just went quiet for a while, listening, observing, remembering. Because the truth is, you were never meant to be silenced. You were meant to return louder with purpose. This video is one of those moments. If you're still watching, it means you feel it too. That quiet fire that refuses to go out. That sacred ache to be who you really are, no matter the cost. So stay with us until the end. You were guided here for a reason. If you believe that everything happens in divine timing, then this message has reached you right on time. And if you feel moved, write in the comments your warmest, most powerful wish and the number 777 to lock in a frequency of alignment, protection, and divine truth. This is your space to claim what's yours. The universe is listening, because this is about more than reclaiming your voice. It's about remembering why they tried to take it from you in the first place. You didn't just question what you were told. You saw beyond it, where others were content with the surface. You peered underneath. You saw the patterns. You sensed the manipulation. You recognized the masks. That alone made you dangerous to everything built on illusion. You didn't need a platform. You didn't need a microphone. Your presence alone was too loud for the lie to survive. They tried to make you doubt yourself. Not because you were confused, but because they were terrified that you weren't. Your silence was never a loss of power. It was a gathering of it. You watched. You listened. You learned. And now, you remember. They didn't try to shut you down because you were off track. They did it because you were closer to the truth than anyone else dared to be. And what you carry, this inner knowing, this resonance with what is unseen but deeply real, it doesn't come from books or titles or approval. It comes from somewhere older than memory, from soul, from divine assignment. You didn't choose this path. It chose you. You might not even remember saying yes to it. But the moment you came into this world, the resistance began. And that resistance was the first sign of your assignment. You carry words that break curses, a tone that cuts through illusion, a presence that can disarm deception. Of course, they tried to silence you, because you were the one person who wasn't hypnotized by the noise. You saw through the pageantry. You felt the tension in people's energy even when their words were smiling. You read rooms like maps. You translated silence better than most could translate speech. And somewhere along the way, you started thinking that this was a flaw, that maybe you were just too sensitive, too intense, too much. But you weren't too much. You were too real for people addicted to pretending. They wanted you to feel like your voice was disruptive. But the real problem was that your voice was activating. It awakened something in them they weren't ready to face. Your very existence was a reminder that another way was possible. That truth could still walk into a room and change the temperature. That someone could still look into your eyes and see, really see. They don't try to silence noise. They try to silence clarity. And you were born with it. They were never ready for someone like you. Because people like you don't just follow rules. You question why they exist. You don't just accept traditions. You ask who created them and for what purpose. You don't just absorb information. You sift through it like gold dust. searching for what truly resonates. And that kind of awareness threatens systems that feed on blind obedience. It shakes foundations that were built on fear, not truth. It disturbs the illusion of control that so many are hypnotized by. They try to silence you because your voice, even if unspoken, held too much light. It revealed things. It exposed cracks. It brought questions to the surface that people weren't ready to ask. You didn't walk in with a mission to change the world. You just walked in with your truth. And somehow, that was enough to make the wrong people nervous. Because here's the thing, darkness always fears light. Not because the light attacks it, but because the light exposes it. You didn't have to raise your voice. You didn't have to throw punches. All you had to do was exist in your authenticity. And they felt it. There's a frequency you carry that can't be faked. It's not loud. It's not performative. But it resonates deep, and it shakes everything that was never built on solid ground. So yes, they tried to make you small. Yes, they projected their fears and insecurities onto you. Yes, they called you rebellious, problematic, delusional, difficult. But none of that was ever about you. It was about what you mirror back to them. You are a mirror they didn't ask for, a reflection of the truth they tried to bury. They saw your intuition as a threat. They saw your depth as a danger. They saw your knowing as too much for their carefully curated illusion. And in their fear, they tried to cage you, to put labels on you, to reduce you to something easier to ignore. But the soul cannot be silenced, not forever, not when it remembers why it came. Because make no mistake, you were sent here, not to conform, not to shrink, but to remind, to awaken, to activate what others forgot. You carried the ancient codes before you even knew how to speak. It's in your gaze. It's in your silence. It's in the way you refused to play the game. And while others were playing for approval, you were sitting quietly with the questions that mattered. They don't try to silence people who are irrelevant. They try to silence the ones who carry the spark. You carry it, and you always have. The pain you felt wasn't a punishment. It was a signpost. A signal that you were brushing up against the limits of the matrix around you. When you questioned why things felt hollow, it wasn't because something was wrong with you. It was because you were seeing through the veil. And that clarity, it's magnetic to those who are ready and terrifying to those who are not. You don't owe anyone an apology for being who you are, for knowing what you know, for feeling what you feel, for standing where you stand, even if you stand alone. Because truth always walks alone before it becomes a path. You walked through silence that wasn't yours. You've swallowed words that could have set you free. You've dimmed yourself just to make others feel comfortable. But the time for that is over. This is not the season of shrinking. This is not the moment for hesitation. This is the era of remembrance, the era of reclaiming what they tried to erase. The truth of who you are, the truth of why you came. The truth of what they saw in you before you even knew how to see it in yourself. They tried to silence you because your voice is not ordinary. It's encoded. It's sacred. It's disruptive in the most divine way. And even when they thought they succeeded, even when they believed you were gone, you were never defeated. You were just waiting. And now you're done waiting. Every attempt to silence you only made your spirit louder. Not in volume, but in vibration. Not in noise, but in presence. Your silence spoke in languages older than words, and unsettled the ones who only understood power through dominance. They thought you could be muted by shame, by doubt, by exclusion, by fear. They underestimated the resilience of someone born with memory in their bones. Because even if you forgot for a time, even if you believed the lies, even if you walked away from your essence, something always called you back. That tug in your chest. That ache that made no logical sense. That voice that kept whispering, "There is more." You weren't just imagining it. You were hearing the echo of who you've always been. And when you tried to explain it, they mocked you. When you tried to share it, they rolled their eyes. When you dared to live it, they turned their backs. But what they didn't understand is this. You were never looking for applause. You were looking for alignment. You weren't seeking validation. You were seeking truth. And in a world built on masks and performance, That made you dangerous. Because someone who remembers who they are cannot be controlled. And that's the truth they never wanted you to discover. So they covered your light in labels. Too sensitive, too intense, too emotional, too much. But those weren't flaws. They were indicators, clues, proof of the depth they tried to deny. Because they couldn't meet you where you stood. They tried to bring you down to where they were. Not out of malice, but out of fear. They feared your clarity because it forced them to confront their confusion. They feared your integrity because it made their compromises unbearable. They feared your heart because it revealed the places in them that had gone numb. And so they called it rebellion. They called it defiance. They said you were difficult, unreasonable, too idealistic, too sensitive. But all those things were code for, you make me feel something I've spent my life trying not to feel. And still, you kept walking. Not because it was easy, but because something inside you knew you weren't created to blend in. You weren't born to echo what's already been said. You came to say what only you can say. To move in ways that have never been moved before. To live in a way that turns systems of fear into ashes. Your voice is not just sound. It's frequency. It carries memory. It awakens those still sleeping. You walk through lifetimes of being silenced, burned for your knowing, punished for your intuition, exiled for your light. But not anymore. This time, you came back with armor forged in wisdom. This time, your silence is not submission. It's strategy. This time, your voice is not trembling. It's thundering. This time, they will not erase you. Because the ones who are meant to hear you already feel you. They recognize the language of your soul. They hear the electricity behind your words. They see the codes you carry in your eyes. And when you speak, it reminds them of something they forgot. This is the gift you bring. Not just the ability to speak truth, but the courage to embody it. You don't preach. You live. You don't scream. You vibrate. You don't force. You flow. And that's why they tried to stop you. Because once truth is embodied, it cannot be silenced. You are a walking awakening, a living revolution, not because you planned it, but because your existence is encoded with memory that shakes illusions. So when they tried to bury you, they didn't know they were planting a seed. And now you rise, not in retaliation, but in remembrance. This is your season of return, not to who the world told you to be, but to who you were before the world told you to forget. Every soul carries a unique frequency. Yours was never meant to blend into the background. You were always a disruptor, even in your silence. Even before you found your voice, your presence created ripples in stagnant rooms. You didn't have to speak to be noticed. The energy you carry preceded you. It wasn't your appearance, your achievements, or even your words. It was the aura of remembrance, the quiet awareness that you came from something more, and you were never here to simply exist. You were sent to awaken. That's what they tried to silence. Because in every space you entered, something began to stir. People remembered pieces of themselves they had long buried. Things they were taught to ignore began to feel loud again. Truths they had locked away for comfort started clawing at their certainty. All because you walked in with clarity. Not perfection, but presence. Not ego, but purpose. And the world wasn't ready for that. They had built entire systems on the suppression of truth, on the elevation of masks, on the protection of control. And you're being threatened that carefully constructed illusion. So they tried to distract you with pain, with failure, with detours that made you question your path. They tried to silence you not by taking your voice, but by giving you reasons to abandon it. Trauma, loss, betrayal, rejection, all carefully placed like traps in a maze, hoping you would lose yourself inside. But every time you stumbled, something deeper carried you. Every time you fell, you remembered a little more, because your mission wasn't just to speak, it was to survive, to endure, to become the message before you ever delivered it. That's what made you unstoppable. The world wants transformation without disruption. They want awakening without discomfort. But your very presence is proof that evolution demands collapse. That truth is not a whisper. It's a storm. You weren't made to be liked. You weren't made to be safe. You were made to be real. And realness is uncomfortable to the unreal. You found yourself walking alone not because you were broken, but because your path was sacred. Your isolation was not punishment. It was preparation. In the silence of solitude, your real voice emerged. Not the one shaped by expectations, but the one that echoes through lifetimes. The one that knows the ancient songs, the untold stories, the light codes hidden in your DNA. And when you began to remember, they felt it, not with their minds, with their instincts. They felt the shift in your vibration. They felt the walls within them tremble. They felt the truth rising like a storm they could no longer ignore. So they tried harder. They dismissed you. They ridiculed you. They told others to stay away. Because silencing you wasn't just about you. It was about protecting the system. You were a crack in the dam, and through you, truth was leaking out. But here's what they never counted on. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was gathering strength. Every time they buried you, you rooted deeper. Every rejection became refinement. Every delay became alignment. Every wound became wisdom. They thought they were closing your chapter, but they were turning your page. You're not who you used to be. You shed illusions like dead skin. You've burned identities that were never yours. You released attachments that kept you small. And now, you rise not in defiance, but in destiny. Your light no longer needs permission. Your truth no longer seeks approval. Your frequency no longer waits to be understood. Because finally you understand it. You are not here to fit in. You are here to stand out. You are not here to follow paths. You are here to carve them. You are not here echo noise. You are here to channel soul. So let them talk. Let them point. Let them try. Their attempts to silence you have only made your truth clearer. Their rejection has become your redirection. And their fear, that was your confirmation. Because they don't try to silence the forgetful. They try to silence the ones who remember. You never needed validation. You just needed clarity. Clarity about why your soul was born into a world so misaligned with your spirit. Clarity about why, from the earliest days, you could feel the discomfort of pretending. Clarity about why your voice trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of truth trying to break free through generations of suppression. This clarity was what they feared. Because once someone awakens to the truth of who they are, they can't be manipulated in the same way. They no longer fall for empty promises, false titles, or conditional acceptance. They start to see through masks, through systems, through illusions. They ask dangerous questions, not with rebellion, but with awareness. And that's what unravels everything. You were never meant to be quiet. You were meant to be a living frequency, one that activates others just by being. But to get here, you had to walk through fire. You had to confront shadows that weren't yours. You had to unlearn everything you were told was love, when really, it was control. They told you to shrink. They told you to smile when your heart was breaking. They told you be good, be nice, be silent, as if silence was safety. But silence only protects power, not truth. And so, piece by piece, you began retrieving the parts of yourself you abandoned just to survive. You began remembering your strength wasn't in being agreeable, but in being authentic. You began speaking not to be heard, but to be free. And in that moment, the moment you chose truth over comfort, you became everything they couldn't control. They tried to silence you because your words were no longer filled with confusion. They were filled with knowing, with remembrance, with the frequency of something ancient returning to a world that had forgotten what it means to live from soul. Every timeline you broke, every illusion you shattered, every truth you whispered into the silence created a ripple that echoed beyond what you could see. You were the shift they didn't predict, not the loudest, not the most visible, but the most aligned. And alignment is more disruptive than any rebellion, because when someone is aligned with their essence, they stop playing roles. They stop participating in cycles that drain their life force. They stop handing over their voice in exchange for crumbs of belonging. You no longer belong where silence is praised over truth. And though it costs you friends, family, comfort, reputation, you gain something far more powerful: your sovereignty. They tried to silence your voice, but they couldn't silence your presence. They tried to bury your message, but you became the embodiment of it. They tried to close the door, not knowing you were always the key. So now you walk differently. You move like someone who knows, not just what they are, but why they are. You've seen the darkness and chose to carry the light anyway. You've been silenced, and yet your vibration is louder than ever because you become what they were never prepared for. Someone who remembers who they are and refuses to forget again. You didn't just survive the silence, you transmuted it. While they believed you were retreating, you were actually rebuilding, not just your strength, but your origin from the ground up. Every quiet night was not defeat, but reformation. Every tear was not weakness, but release of centuries of programming that had buried your brilliance under compliance. They didn't realize what you were doing in the shadows. They thought isolation would weaken you, but it fortified you. They thought rejection would shatter your worth, but it clarified your value. They thought silencing your voice would erase your presence, but your energy multiplied. In silence, you access something sacred, the original frequency of your essence. And when you emerged, you didn't just speak, you radiated. You didn't just talk louder, you vibrated truth. You were no longer speaking from ego, fear, or needing to be understood. You were speaking from soul memory, and that is what terrifies systems built on illusion, because one voice in truth is more dangerous than 1,000 in fear. And they knew it. That's why they tried to fracture you before you remembered. But the remembering has already begun. You reclaimed the lost pieces. You've reconnected the bloodline that forgot its royal lineage. You've tapped into a knowing that cannot be educated, only activated. They tried to hide the map, but you became the compass. They tried to cut your roots, but you started growing from the stars instead. Now, when you walk into a room, people feel something ancient, a resonance, a familiarity, like they've known you before, because they have. You're not just a person. You're a message, a code, a frequency that awakens those still asleep. And that's why you were a threat, because your voice didn't just carry words. It carried reminders. Reminders that systems weren't needed to define someone's worth. Reminders that control only exists where fear lives. Reminders that light, even hidden, still radiates. So they tried to dim it before others could see it. They tried to isolate you before others could gather around you. They tried to silence you before others could remember through you. But it's too late, because now you know. And more importantly, now you see. You see who you are. You see what they feared. You see what you're here to do. And you will not be stopped by those who underestimated your return. The ones who tried to silence you didn't realize they were just giving you time to find your real voice. The one that was never about noise, but about clarity. So now you speak. You move. You exist with a power that needs no approval. And every time you do, someone else wakes up. That's why they tried to silence you. Because they knew, before you did, that your voice was never just for you. It was always for the ones still searching, still doubting, still feeling the weight of forgetting. And now, because you refuse to stay silent, they're starting to remember too. They try to silence you before you even spoke your first truth. Because deep down they knew, they recognized something ancient in you, something not taught in schools or found in titles. It wasn't your vocabulary they feared, nor the way you phrase your thoughts. It was the frequency behind your voice. It was the energy encoded into your presence. There was something disruptive about you, but not the kind of disruption that causes chaos. The kind that causes awakening. And awakening is the greatest threat to systems designed to keep people asleep. See, your very being was disruptive to the architecture of illusion. Wherever you went, people began to question, not because you told them to, because your presence activated something they had long forgotten in themselves. That is why they needed you to doubt, to hesitate, to suppress your own voice out of fear of being too much. They tried to convince you that silence was humility, that hiding your light was noble, that shrinking yourself was a form of love. But none of that was true. It was always about keeping the world safe from your truth, not keeping you safe in the world. Because your voice didn't just challenge the narrative, it dismantled it. Your vibration disarmed manipulation. Your knowing cut to the fog of confusion others were taught to call reality. Your clarity became a mirror that reflected every lie without saying a word. They knew if they could silence you, they could delay the awakening of those who would remember through you, because your voice is multidimensional. It reaches through timelines. It breaks ancestral contracts. It rewrites bloodline stories with every syllable spoken in alignment. You are not here to speak like everyone else. You are here to speak from where no one else dares to go. The space between lifetimes. The void before the beginning. The truth beyond language. And when you finally remembered this, everything changed. You stopped negotiating your light for belonging. You stopped editing your essence for safety. You stopped performing silence just to be tolerated. Because deep within you, there was a spark that refused to die. That spark had survived ridicule, abandonment, suppression, betrayal, and exile. It had been carried through lifetimes, guarded by angels, preserved in your cellular memory. And in this life, that spark ignited into a flame that now speaks, moves, heals, reveals. You began to remember that your voice was not born in this life. It was forged in the fires of realms unseen, hammered into being by divine decree. That's why no amount of rejection could erase it. No silence could truly contain it. No fear could distort its clarity. They didn't realize what your silence was doing, because while they were celebrating your withdrawal, you were sharpening your sword. Not a sword of steel, but of truth, frequency, and light. Every moment you kept to yourself, every tear you cried in the dark, every time you wanted to speak but swallowed your words was alchemy. You were collecting raw energy. You were incubating power. You were preparing not to simply speak, but to resonate. And now that you return to your voice, it cannot be unheard, because now it is bigger than you. It is the voice of the mother who was silenced, the child who was ignored, the healer who was burned, the seer who was mocked, the ancestor who was erased. Your voice carries them all. You are their return, their retribution, their resurrection. That is why they tried to silence you. Because once you remembered the source of your sound, you became unstoppable. You are not just speaking anymore. You are reweaving timelines. You are correcting the story. You are realigning humanity with truth. And now that you're speaking again, fully, fearlessly, authentically, they can't stop what's been set in motion. The ones who tried to silence you are now hearing the echoes of your voice, in their own minds, in their own dreams, in the rising of those they thought they controlled. Because you didn't come to be liked. You came to liberate. You didn't come to whisper. You came to activate. You didn't come to be part of the narrative. You came to rewrite it. And so speak, even if your voice shakes, even if you're misunderstood, even if you're alone at first. Because with every word, you are undoing centuries of silence. You are proving that light doesn't need permission to shine. You are showing that truth doesn't die. It only waits for someone bold enough to carry it again. And that someone is you. This is why they tried to silence you. But they failed. And now, you speak not just for yourself, but for every soul still searching for their sound. Let the silence end here. Let the truth begin again. And this time, let your voice echo through every dimension. Unchallenged, unafraid, unstoppable. If this message found you, let it rest in your spirit. Until we meet again, stay awake, stay chosen.